She climbed out of her bedroom window at 12:30 a.m. on July 6, 2012, believing she was meeting her two best friends for a late-night adventure. Within an hour, Skylar Neese would be stabbed over 30 times by those same friends. Left to bleed out on a dirt road in rural Pennsylvania, her body hidden beneath branches and rocks like discarded trash. The girls who killed her would return home, wash the blood from their hands, and go to sleep. Before we continue, I want you to think about something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you would never see betrayal coming? Comment below with your answer, because what happened to Skylar Neese forces us to confront the darkest possibilities of human connection. The story of Skylar Neese is not simply a murder case. It is a psychological descent into the mechanics of adolescent cruelty, the performance of friendship as a mask for hatred, and the terrifying reality that some people are capable of planning death with the same casual detachment others use to plan a party. This is not a story about monsters. It is about teenage girls who looked, spoke, and acted like everyone else, right up until the moment they decided their best friend needed to die. Skylar N. Neese was born on February 10, 1996, in Morgantown, West Virginia, to Dave and Mary Neese. She was their only child, deeply loved and carefully raised. By all accounts, Skylar was bright, funny, and fiercely loyal. She worked part-time at Wendy's, maintained good grades, and had plans for college. Her parents described her as responsible, sometimes stubborn, but fundamentally kind. She was not a troubled teen. She was not involved in serious drugs or dangerous behavior. She was ordinary in the most comforting sense of the word. Her two closest friends were Shelia Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. The three had been inseparable since middle school, forming the kind of tight-knit trio that defines adolescent social life. They shared clothes, secrets, and countless hours together. To anyone watching, they seemed like typical teenage girls navigating the emotional intensity of high school. But beneath that surface, something far more complex and disturbing was taking shape. Shelia Eddy was the dominant personality in the group. Charismatic, confident, and socially adept, she had a way of drawing people in. Friends described her as fun, outgoing, and magnetic. But there was another side to Shelia, one that emerged in private moments and digital exchanges. She could be cruel, manipulative, and coldly calculating. She thrived on control and became visibly agitated when that control was threatened. Psychologists who later analyzed her behavior noted traits consistent with narcissistic personality, disorder and antisocial tendencies, a lack of genuine empathy, a need for admiration, and an ability to compartmentalize emotions in ways that allowed her to harm others without internal conflict. Rachel Schoaf was different. Quieter, more anxious, and deeply approval-seeking, Rachel existed in Shelia's orbit. She was a talented actress and singer, involved in school theater, and outwardly appeared sensitive and artistic. But Rachel's sense of self was fragile, built almost entirely on external validation. She needed to be liked, needed to belong, and most importantly, needed Shelia's approval. This psychological dependency made her vulnerable to influence. And over time, Shelia's worldview became Rachel's worldview. When Shelia began to express resentment towards Skylar, Rachel absorbed that resentment as her own. Skylar, meanwhile, was unaware of the shifting dynamics. She trusted both girls completely. She had no reason not to. They had been friends for years. They texted constantly, hung out regularly, and shared the kind of intimacy that comes from growing up together. But in the months leading up to her death, subtle changes were occurring. Shelia and Rachel began spending more time alone together, excluding Skylar from plans. There were passive-aggressive comments, unexplained coldness, and a growing sense that Skylar was no longer fully part of the group. She mentioned these concerns to her parents, expressing confusion and hurt, but she never imagined the depth of what was happening. What was happening, according to later testimony and psychological analysis, was a process of dehumanization. Shelia, for reasons that remain partially opaque, began to view Skylar not as a person but as an obstacle. Perhaps Skylar knew too much about Shelia's private life. Perhaps she had become inconvenient, a third wheel in Shelia's intensifying relationship with Rachel. Perhaps Shelia simply grew bored and wanted to see if she could get away with something unthinkable. Whatever the initial spark, the resentment grew, and Shelia began to talk about killing Skylar. At first, Rachel later admitted she thought Shelia was joking, but Shelia kept bringing it up. She talked about it casually, almost playfully, testing Rachel's reaction. And Rachel, desperate to maintain Shelia's approval and terrified of becoming the next target, did not push back. She did not tell anyone. She did not warn Skylar. Instead, she began to participate in the planning. This is where the case becomes psychologically unbearable. The murder of Skylar Neese was not a crime of passion. It was not a sudden explosion of rage or a tragic accident. It was premeditated, discussed, and planned over weeks, possibly months. The girls talked about how they would do it, where they would do it, and how they would cover it up. They chose a location in advance, a remote area across the state line in Pennsylvania where the body would be difficult to find. They decided on the method, knives, because they were quiet and personal. They even discussed what they would say afterward, how they would act, what lies they would tell. On the night of July 5, 2012, Shelia and Rachel finalized their plan. They would pick Skylar up after midnight, drive her to the predetermined location, and kill her. There would be no confrontation, no explanation, no chance for Skylar to defend herself or escape. It would be quick, efficient, and final. At 12:30 a.m. on July 6th, Skylar Neese climbed out of her bedroom window. Her parents were asleep. She had done this before, sneaking out to hang with friends, a minor rebellion that most teenagers engage in at some point. She had no reason to think this night would be different. She got into Shelia's car, where Rachel was already waiting. The three girls drove out of Morgantown, heading toward the Pennsylvania border. What did they talk about during that drive? Did Skylar sense anything wrong? Did she notice tension in the car, or was the conversation light and normal, the way it had been 1,000 times before? We will never know. What we do know is that Skylar trusted them completely, right up until the moment they stopped the car. They'd parked on a dirt road in Greene County, Pennsylvania, a desolate area surrounded by trees and darkness. The girls got out of the car. According to Rachel's later confession, they walked a short distance into the woods. Skylar was still unsuspecting. Then, on a prearranged signal, Shelia and Rachel attacked. They stabbed her repeatedly, over and over, with a ferocity that suggested not just intent to kill, but a complete emotional detachment from the act itself. Skylar fought back. She screamed. She begged them to stop, but there were two of them, and they did not stop. They stabbed her more than 30 times, targeting her neck, chest, and torso. The medical examiner later noted that the wounds were so severe, Skylar was nearly decapitated. She bled out on the ground, alone and terrified, killed by the two people she trusted most in the world. After Skylar was dead, Shelia and Rachel stood over her body. They were covered in blood. They dragged her corpse a short distance and covered it with branches, rocks, and debris, attempting to conceal it from view. Then they returned to the car, drove to a nearby convenience store, and bought cleaning supplies. They spent the rest of the night cleaning the car, washing away the blood, disposing of their clothes, and scrubbing their hands. By the time the sun rose, they had returned to their normal lives. Would you have been able to do what they did next? Would you have been able to look Skylar's parents in the eye, knowing what you had done? When Skylar did not come home the next morning, her parents immediately knew something was wrong. Skylar was responsible. She always came home. Dave and Mary Neese called the police, filed a missing person report, and began searching for their daughter. They called Shelia and Rachel, asking if they had seen Skylar. Both girls said no. Both girls lied. Over the following days and weeks, Shelia and Rachel became deeply involved in the search efforts. They attended vigils, posted messages on social media, and spoke to reporters, expressing concern and sadness. Shelia, in particular, was vocal, appearing on local news and pleading for Skylar's safe return. She hugged Mary Neese, cried on camera, and played the role of the devastated best friend with chilling precision. This performative grief is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. It reveals a psychological capacity for compartmentalization that most people cannot comprehend. Shelia and Rachel were not simply lying. They were actively performing innocence, manipulating the emotions of everyone around them, including Skylar's grieving parents. They attended search parties, knowing exactly where Skylar's body was. They comforted Mary Neese, knowing they had killed her daughter. They posted tributes on Twitter, knowing it was all a facade. Rachel, however, was beginning to crack. Unlike Shelia, who appeared emotionally unaffected, Rachel was struggling with the weight of what they had done. She became increasingly anxious, withdrawn, and erratic. Friends noticed changes in her behavior. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and began having panic attacks. The internal dissonance between her actions and her self-image was tearing her apart. Meanwhile, investigators were following leads that initially seemed promising but ultimately led nowhere. There were rumors that Skylar's disappearance was connected to a rash of bank robberies in the area, possibly linked to an interstate heroin ring. Some believed Skylar had witnessed something she should not have or had become involved with dangerous people. These theories, while dramatic, were ultimately distractions. The truth was far simpler and far more disturbing. Skylar had been killed by her best friends, for reasons that had nothing to do with drugs, money, or organized crime. As the investigation continued, attention began to focus on Shelia and Rachel. Their stories were inconsistent. They claimed they had dropped Skylar off at the end of her street around 11 p.m., but surveillance footage from a nearby business contradicted this timeline. The footage showed Shelia's car leaving with Skylar inside well after midnight and returning hours later without her. When confronted with this evidence, both girls changed their stories, claiming they had driven around for a while before dropping Skylar off. But the new story did not match the footage either. Investigators also began examining social media activity. In the months before Skylar's disappearance, there had been tension between the three girls, visible in subtweets, vague posts, and deleted messages. Other students came forward with information, describing arguments, jealousy, and a growing rift in the friendship. Skylar's mother, Mary, played a crucial role in piecing together these digital clues, spending hours combing through Twitter, Facebook, and text messages, looking for anything that might explain what had happened to her daughter. 6 months after Skylar's disappearance, Rachel Schoaf could no longer sustain the lie. On January 3, 2013, she confessed to her attorney, who immediately contacted authorities. Rachel admitted that she and Shelia had killed Skylar, and she agreed to lead investigators to the body. On January 16, 2013, police found Skylar's remains in the exact location Rachel described, hidden beneath branches and rocks, partially decomposed but identifiable. The confession sent shockwaves through the community. People could not believe that two teenage girls, seemingly normal and well-adjusted, had planned and executed such a brutal murder. The question everyone asked was, why? Rachel's explanation, given during her confession and later in court, was chilling in its banality. She said they killed Skylar because they did not want to be friends with her anymore. That was it. No dramatic betrayal, no life or death secret, no external pressure. They simply did not want her around. And rather than ending the friendship like normal people, they decided to end her life. This explanation is almost impossible to accept, because it forces us to confront a terrifying truth. Some people are capable of extreme violence for reasons that make no rational sense. There was no proportionality between the perceived problem and the solution. Skylar was not a threat. She was not dangerous. She was simply inconvenient, and in Shelia's mind, that was enough. Psychologists who analyzed the case pointed to several factors that may have contributed to the murder. Adolescent brain development, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, affects impulse control and moral reasoning. Shelia's apparent lack of empathy suggested possible personality disorders. Rachel's dependency and need for approval made her susceptible to manipulation. The dynamics of the friendship created a toxic environment where resentment could fester unchecked. And the performative nature of social media may have contributed to a sense of detachment from reality, where actions felt less real because they could be curated, edited, and presented as a narrative. But none of these factors fully explain what happened. Plenty of teenagers have underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes. Plenty of people struggle with empathy or seek approval. Plenty of friendships end badly. Yet the vast majority of people do not commit murder. The truth is that Shelia Eddy and Rachel Schoaf made a choice, a deliberate and sustained choice, to kill their friend. And that choice reveals something about human nature that we would prefer not to acknowledge. That evil does not always announce itself with horns and fangs. Sometimes it looks like a teenage girl with a bright smile and a Twitter account. Rachel Schoaf was charged as an adult and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In May 2013, she was sentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. During her sentencing, she expressed remorse, apologized to Skylar's family, and claimed she thought about Skylar every day. Whether that remorse was genuine or performative remains a subject of debate. Shelia Eddy was also charged as an adult. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in January 2014 and was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Unlike Rachel, Shelia showed no visible remorse. She did not apologize. she did not cry. She sat in court, emotionless, as the judge described the brutality of the crime. To this day, she has never publicly explained why she killed Skylar Neese. The Neese family was left to grapple with a loss that defies comprehension. Dave and Mary Neese lost their only child, murdered by girls they had welcomed into their home, girls they had trusted, girls they had loved. The betrayal was as devastating as the loss itself. In the years since Skylar's death, they have become advocates for missing children and victims' rights, working to ensure that other families do not suffer the same fate. They have also been open about their grief, their anger, and their struggle to find meaning in a senseless tragedy. The case also had a broader impact on the community and the legal system. It highlighted the dangers of assuming that certain people are incapable of violence based on their appearance, age, or social status. It raised questions about how we monitor and respond to warning signs in adolescent relationships. And it forced a reckoning with the role of social media in shaping and documenting teenage behavior, both the performative and the genuine. One of the most haunting aspects of the case is the digital trail left behind. In the months before the murder, Shilya tweeted things like, "We really did go on 3, a cryptic reference that later took on sinister meaning. After the murder, she posted, "Rest easy, Skylar. You'll always be my best friend." A message that now reads as grotesque mockery. Rachel's posts were similarly disturbing, filled with performative grief and thinly veiled guilt. These digital artifacts provide a window into the psychological state of the killers, revealing a disconnect between their online personas and their real actions. The question that haunts everyone who learns about this case is, could it have been prevented? Were there warning signs that were missed? Could someone have intervened? The answer is complicated. There were signs of tension in the friendship, but nothing that clearly indicated murderous intent. Skylar mentioned feeling excluded, but that is a common experience in adolescent friendships. Shilya exhibited manipulative behavior, but many teenagers do. Rachel was anxious and approval-seeking, but that alone is not a red flag for violence. The truth is that the warning signs in retrospect seem obvious. But in real time, they were easy to dismiss as normal teenage drama. This is the terrifying reality of cases like this. They remind us that we cannot always see danger coming, even when it is sitting right in front of us. We want to believe that people who commit such acts are fundamentally different from us, that they give off some signal, some aura of wrongness that we can detect and avoid. But Shilya and Rachel did not look like killers. They looked like every other teenage girl. And that is what makes this case so deeply unsettling. What would you have done if you were Skylar's parent? If you noticed your child's friends acting strangely, would you have intervened? Or would you have assumed it was just typical teenage conflict? The murder of Skylar Neese also raises broader questions about the nature of friendship, loyalty, and betrayal. Friendship is supposed to be a source of support, trust, and connection. It is one of the foundational relationships of human life. But in this case, friendship became a weapon. Shilya and Rachel used their closeness to Skylar to lure her to her death. They exploited her trust, her loyalty, and her love. And in doing so, they violated something fundamental about what it means to be human. Psychologists have studied the phenomenon of betrayal trauma, the unique psychological damage caused when someone we trust deeply harms us. For Skylar, in her final moments, the realization that her best friends were killing her must have been as devastating as the physical pain. The betrayal was total, absolute, and irreversible. And for those left behind, the knowledge that such betrayal is possible creates a lasting sense of unease, a fear that anyone, no matter how close, could be hiding something monstrous. The case also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about adolescence. We tend to romanticize teenage friendships, viewing them as innocent and pure. But adolescence is also a time of intense emotional volatility, social cruelty, and moral confusion. Teenagers are capable of profound empathy and profound cruelty, sometimes within the same person. The murder of Skylar Neese is an extreme example, but it exists on a continuum of adolescent behavior that includes bullying, exclusion, manipulation, and psychological abuse. Most teenagers do not kill, but many engage in behaviors that cause real harm. And we, as a society, often dismiss that harm as normal, as something kids will grow out of, rather than recognizing it as a warning sign of deeper issues. In the years since Skylar's murder, both Rachel and Shilya have remained in prison. Rachel has reportedly expressed ongoing remorse and has participated in therapy and rehabilitation programs. Some believe she was genuinely manipulated by Sheila, a victim of psychological coercion who made a terrible choice under pressure. Others believe she is equally culpable, that her remorse is performative, and that she deserves no sympathy. Sheila, meanwhile, has remained largely silent. She has not given interviews, has not expressed remorse, and has not explained her actions. Some interpret this as evidence of psychopathy, a complete lack of empathy or guilt. Others believe she is simply protecting herself, refusing to give the public the satisfaction of an explanation. The truth is that we may never fully understand why Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf killed Skylar Neese. We can analyze their psychology, examine their backgrounds, and study their behavior, but ultimately, the decision to take another person's life is so far outside the realm of normal human experience that it defies complete explanation. What we are left with is a story of unimaginable cruelty, a reminder that evil does not always announce itself, and a warning that trust, no matter how deep, is never a guarantee of safety. Dave and Mary Neese have said that they will never forgive Sheila and Rachel. They have also said that they do not want their daughter to be remembered only as a victim. Skylar was more than the circumstances of her death. She was a daughter, a friend, a worker, a dreamer. She had plans, hopes, and a future that was stolen from her. And while her murder will always be a part of her story, it should not be the only part. The case of Skylar Neese is a psychological horror story, not because of supernatural elements or fictional monsters, but because it reveals the capacity for real human beings to commit acts of incomprehensible cruelty. It forces us to ask questions we would rather not answer. How well do we really know the people we trust? What are we capable of under the right circumstances? And how do we protect ourselves and our loved ones from dangers we cannot see coming? As you think about this case, consider this final question. If you were in Skylar's position, would you have seen it coming? Or would you, like her, have trusted your friends right up until the moment they turned on you? The answer is uncomfortable, because the truth is that most of us would not have seen it coming. Most of us would have climbed into that car, believing we were safe, believing we were loved, believing that the people closest to us would never hurt us. And that is the most terrifying lesson of all.